You are the most cracked student VC that I know. You've built amazing ecosystems and you are known as the connector of your community. Ayush, welcome to the podcast series of Becoming VC Fellows and Interns.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. Really appreciate you taking the time out, and thank you very much for the kind words.
Yeah, and really looking back, right? When you kind of connect the dots, what made you become right now as the venture fellow at Pear VC?
100%. Well, so the journey kind of dates way before I talked to one of the GPs at Pear who eventually got me the offer to become a fellow. I was really interested in the startup scene here at UIUC. I mean, one of the reasons that I think Midwest as a founder ecosystem is extremely underserved is because we've seen a lot of extremely high talent density in the last couple of years spinning out of not just UIUC, but a lot of other partner schools, including Northwestern, U Chicago, et cetera, right? So that was part of my reason that I wanted to work at a venture firm that really respects pre-seed and seed stage startups, but at the same time also is extremely focused on supporting these founders beyond just writing the check. And that was part of the reason how I got connected to Pear. I had heard a lot about the founder stories of both Pejman and Mar. They're both exceptional as individuals. They've got a lot of incredible experiences that have helped shape Pear to what it is now. And through that, I was just extremely inspired to just be a part of the firm to some extent. And with all the serendipity and everything that sort of came into my radar, I was able to get this opportunity at Pear and become a fellow. And since the past 8 months, I hope I've given a lot of value to the firm through my founder network and through supporting a lot of these startups early on. So yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you have been through quite the journey. Who is VC for?
That's a great question, Joe. One of the things that has always been in top of my mind is I feel, and a lot of people might be having contradictory opinions, I feel venture capital is extremely accessible to everybody as long as you have one of these, or actually all of these three things. One is hyper curiosity. You got to be extremely curious about every single thing that's happening within your industry, within your field of function, or just in general about whatever you're passionate about. And you gotta have the ability to learn it extremely fast, right? Venture rewards curiosity more than anything else. If you're somebody that knows what's happening, if you're somebody that could derive insights from news, insights from live events, insights from, you know, things that are happening around your ecosystem, right? That is something which is extremely rewarding to a venture capitalist. The second is your ability to connect with individuals. Because at the end of the day, venture capital is a service business. You're going to be chatting every day to one of these three people: founders, investors, or customers, right? So at the end of the day, if you're not able to establish those relationships, not just be extremely transactional, but be value driven first and ensure that the other person on the side of their that camera or that microphone is able to connect with what you care about, but at the same time also feels you respect their value and their offerings. That's how you become a really successful VC. Now, as for the third part could be anything, right? This is where all individuals that are in venture capital differentiate themselves. You could be an artist, you could be a podcaster, you could be an engineer, you could be a psychologist, you could be literally anything in the world, but you need to have a strong intuition on what good looks like. And that doesn't get developed out of thin air, right? You need to have a lot of reps in, you need to get a lot of exposure to industries, to people in order to become somebody that people can rely on. That's my quick, snappy top three, I guess, traits of how venture capitalists are defined.
Yeah, it sounds like, these three parts, some might be something that you kind of develop over time. Like what did you do in your childhood all the way up to before you even known about the venture industry?
My journey was very different when I was growing up. I grew up on the westernmost city in India. It's called Ahmedabad. It's in Gujarat. Uh, very flat lands surrounded by sea, had a couple of mountains around, also desert. So it's a very interesting geography. Growing up, both of my parents were into business. So my dad and my mom, they're both actually working on the same business. They own a travel agency. And every dinner conversation around was always about what's happening around the ecosystem? How do we improve our profitability? What are some of the struggles we're facing with customers? How do we improve our services? I mean, as a young child, I mean, this was something that really fascinated me. I was like, well, everything that I'm learning in school entailed physics, chemistry, biology, and computer science. But this is a different field, right? This is something nobody really talks about in school, but it's also something that I particularly was very fascinated by. Growing up, I was also a big time athlete. I've been swimming for the last 16 years. I competed in nationals, also qualified into bigger competitions in the world for my favorite stroke was backstroke. So I've been a professional backstroker for a while now. I've not been doing swimming professionally at this point. I've been just doing it as a hobby, but sports really taught me a lot about what actually transferred into me becoming an entrepreneur. One of the biggest things that I particularly look into individuals when I help back them is their grit and the hustle that they've had. And one of the best indicators to see that is if they've competed on in anything professionally, right? Because especially in sports, I mean, we see everything from politics to, struggles with injuries to even just a lot of internal conflicts and dialogues that you need to deal with. All of that is extremely transferable into business and venture capital. So I think I didn't know about venture capital growing up, but I did. I mean, in hindsight, I could tell that this was something I would eventually get into based on everything that I've experienced. Now, sort of moving a bit forward into my high school, that's where I started my first company. It's called Revs Green. Now, the company doesn't exist anymore. We sold it, had a successful exit. The idea was very simple. It was basically extracting metals and worn out electronics and then sourcing it to local OEMs. So that's how we made money. Didn't have another co-founder, had somebody who was sort of like a founding engineer, but the company was basically, I was the only solo founder running it for 3.5 years before I had an exit. And raising money in India also taught me a lot of other things, which I don't really see happening in the US. One is the risk appetite everywhere is very different. The way individuals look at your companies, the metrics that they evaluate you on are not the same at all. In fact, most of the venture firms also have a very different structure in terms of their profitability once they look at startups across different industries and different geographies. So that's something I've been learning over and over again. And that just gave me a very global first lens, which now helps me look at a bunch of different startups across industries that I probably have never heard of, but I still get a chance to evaluate them from a very objective lens. And it makes me I hope it does make me very receptive towards founders. So that was my journey growing up. Happy to talk a bit more about how I sort of got into aerospace, because I know that sounds very different from what I'm doing right now. But this is how my childhood was sort of shaped.
Yeah. And, being a founder, having been on that journey, it certainly does help you emphasize with founders. And, you literally did all of that in high school, which is like absolutely crazy. So we talked about high school. Let's talk about college, right? Anyone who just scrolls your LinkedIn profile. For our viewers, just click on the link below in the descriptions. But anyone who scrolls it is like, what the heck and how the heck has this guy been doing this? Basically worked technically in most of the big companies. So really, really strong technical guy, right? And then on the other side, you've built such a strong community network ecosystem and, just an amazing, amazing, solid VC, right? So how on earth did all of that happen? Talk about your college days.
Well, no, I think this is a very kind compliment. I've not achieved as much as what you think I have. A lot of my work is just solely dependent on the people that took a bet on me early on. It's a lot about trust, right? When you do support individuals from the very start, they also support you when the right time comes in. And all of my opportunities are sort of like a resonance of the same fact. So, yes, that is correct. I've been very technical from early on. Most of my work now doesn't really involve a lot of engineering components. Although, as an engineer, I mean, professionally, I'm still studying aerospace engineering. One of the things that I learned is the ability to have a strong systems based thinking is extremely, extremely valuable in any complex field, including venture capital. And when I say systems based thinking, I know this is a jargon, but what it actually means is how easily can you first comprehend something that has a lot of components attached to it. So for venture, right? If you're running a fund, you've got to deal with a bunch of things, all the way from raising money to establishing what you're going to be differentiating yourself on, to bringing in deal flow, to sort of managing your LPs. once they make a commitment, to also just creating your brand, right? Having a persona, which is then going to bring you a lot of inbound. So venture capital inherently is extremely complex. There's a reason why the field is considered opaque by a lot of individuals that don't know anything about finance or technology in general. And just to answer your question, I feel the way to get a lot of opportunities and the way I've gotten those opportunities is not being transactional. When, let's say, for instance, right, one of the people that was on my board of advisors back in my startup era, he told me this, right? He was like, whenever you're working with a team, always criticize ideas, never criticize a person. Initially, I was extremely objective, and sometimes that did sound as rude to a lot of people. Now, in the startup world, that route is still considered something bullish and investors kind of take a bet on because they think you have a chip on your shoulder. But in the corporate world and in academia, this is very different, right? It doesn't directly apply to a lot of those places. So the one thing that I realized when I work across different industries and different functions is to always be very big on professional opinions and professional ideas, but never ever attack somebody on their individuality. And again, this is extremely simple when said, but in practice, when you have all sorts of ego battles and you have a lot of internal dialogues, when you sort of like have a debate with your colleague or when you have a debate with somebody senior, this all really showcases. And to the right people, they can easily tell between who's extremely high EQ and who's not. Right. So I think that was one of the reasons why I was able to get a lot of these opportunities. Beyond that, even I don't have a magic wand to say how I got that and why. I mean, when I look back at what I've done so far, I just feel this is a beginning and there's a lot more that I need to achieve and there's a lot more I need to accomplish before I become extremely reliable to some of the companies at which scale I'm sort of envisioning to work on. So yeah, it's still a very juvenile part of my journey, and I hope all the mistakes that I made and I'm able to translate them into actionable insights and sort of really improve myself and improve the lives of everybody that's around me.
Yeah, and for our audience to just use this right away, does that mean that, let's say when someone says a statement or maybe they did something wrong that you think they did something wrong, all you have to do is not say like, "Hey, you did this wrong. You should have done it like this." You should say something like, "Hey, I'm curious. So why explain a little more of why you did this? What is your thinking behind this?" And just keep asking them questions until you get to the root of it. Is that how our audience should be putting this as an actionable insight?
100%. That's spot on. I think the one thing that a mentor of mine, and I recently connected with her. It's not been that long. She's one of the principals at Entrepreneurs First. Her name is Ali. What she said was, and again, this is something she uses when she evaluates founders. And Entrepreneurs First is a talent investor. They were the ones who sort of invented the field of actually betting on just the individual taking literally throwing the idea out of the way, right? So what she taught us was the way she evaluates individuals when they're sort of going against the tide or going against the way they naturally want them to flow towards. She just becomes a psychologist. She asks them questions. She makes them go in the direction where it's the most commercially feasible route for them to actually scale any idea or conception that they had in their mind. And I think that's something everybody can learn, right? Asking questions is also a skill. And the only way you can learn that is to get your reps in. You got to have, you got to get a lot of opportunities where you can ask questions to people that matter. But at the same time, you can just practice that with a lot of your friends. Just see who's the most calm individual when, tensions rise, when there's a lot of debate happening. Who's the person that can get it all sorted while still having their own say and pushing it through everybody? It's kind of like acting as a politician, right? What does a politician do? They know how to persuade people in the direction that they eventually want everybody to flow in. Now, if you're somebody that struggles with that, if you're somebody that struggles in, I guess, negotiation or just in general, making everybody go in the flow with what you are envisioning, one of the best ways to do that is literally just get into uncomfortable situations. And a funny example is, right, like if you're out on a date and if you don't know the other person, what are you going to do? Are you just going to ask the typical cliche questions of, hey, like, what's your name? Where are you from? No, you're going to strike up a conversation. You can just ask it as a pun, right? And this really translates into VC. You can just ask an extremely random question, see how the other person reacts. And based on that, you can get a sense of how that person thinks. You can go a layer deeper more than what you would otherwise if you're just asking questions that all of us are kind of like zoned into and we have a signature answer that we give no matter what, right? So I think that ability of getting the right answers from people starts from asking the right questions. And I think that's what I was trying to communicate with my previous idea.
Yeah, and it's about these guiding questions, right? Where it's like, okay, so I kind of know the answer and or I kind of know the type of direction you should go towards to find the answer for yourself. So then
Yes.
you realize it and I don't have to tell you it. Cause if I tell you the answer, you're gonna be like, yeah, yeah, right. Like I really don't care. It goes in one ear, out one ear, right? But then if you realized the answer from me asking that guiding question, then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a genius. Like, I'm going to listen to this because this is my solution, not your solution. So that's really, really amazing, right? So in this situation, I've practiced it quite a bit as well. But what if, you are always, asking these guiding questions, but then the person still doesn't understand or just like really, really stubborn? What do you do then?
Well, I think you flip the narrative, right? I mean, once you realize the other person is not either getting the context of your ask or in general just is not interested in what you're offering or what you really want to talk about, you flip the narrative. You sort of take a detour and you're like, well, okay, I mean, you don't say that, but you just try to deviate the conversation back to that individual's interest. Now, throughout that conversation, if you're smart enough, you would actually be able to tell what that person wants to talk about. That person would inherently try to push towards something which maybe you're resisting on. And in order to just have them be a bit more vulnerable, you can just kick off the conversation against the flow of your own, right? And that would help them get more trust instilled in you. And once that trust is established, you can then try to backtrace it to what you wanted to communicate and, take it forward.
Yeah. And, that's just one of the many strategies that you can use to truly just help your friend, right? Because every single time and every single day, you are having these conversations. Just like Ayush says, if you're getting better at it, you are going to be getting really, really good at communicating with people. And that is the most important thing in the venture capital industry. So right now, I want to really kind of fast fire a little bit on all of your VC roles in the past, how you got them,
Hmm.
aka what are the main reasons that you got chosen for that role, and what stage companies were they looking for. So
Let's do it.
let's start. Well, this one, HP VC analyst.
Yeah, well, so one of the partners at HP Tech Ventures, he had opened up this very interesting role where you get to sort of source companies, especially at the intersection of IoT and AR and VR. Back then, that was one of their biggest focuses. And this was not an opportunity that was posted online. This was not an opportunity that sort of came in the radar of everybody and you can easy apply on LinkedIn and get in. It was more like a person that I met in, well, okay, a person that I met in person in San Francisco knew that partner who was looking for individuals that could do this on a contract basis. And I was like, I've not had an exposure to venture capital in all honesty. This was one of my first roles in actually sourcing companies. When I got into the role, I realized every company that we were looking for was typically in the Series A kind of belt. They were not seed, they were not Series B. They were either bridging between seed to Series A or they were at Series A. And most of my work actually started off as sourcing, but eventually converted into screening. So a couple of companies that I sourced, one of them kind of got in through most of their rounds, but didn't get in finally. I'm pretty sure it's a part of Harlem Capital's portfolio now. So when we were looking at these companies, we try to screen through a bunch of metrics. Now, HP is obviously a corporate venture capital firm, so the way they source and the way they screen is not going to be just, oh, I need my X amount of returns in the next couple of years, but they also need to match with the thesis of how HP was evolving in that specific point of time. So, yeah, that's a bit about the role. It was very fascinating. It was, I think, probably the only role where most of my job was only screening. And there was not a lot of media coverage. There was nothing like that. It was just primarily research, and just producing the best possible outcome so that the partners can have more higher leverage tasks on their plate. Um,
Yeah. And for our audience, as a side note, HP is, a big corporation. A CVC, a corporate venture fund, if you just search it up, there's two main objectives. It's either strategic or it's returns based. And they try to balance that a little bit. It's different for every CVC, but you can learn more about that if you just search it up. And yeah, this type of answer is like perfect. Like just give me that format. And then next one is Leland VC Bootcamp.
Yeah, so Leland is a startup. The boot camp that I was a part of, this was not an internship. This was not a VC role, quote unquote. This was more of a boot camp that I got into. I got a full ride scholarship to sort of work with everybody on the team. I was the only undergrad that was a part of this boot camp at the time. So everybody with me, one of the friends that I made through the boot camp, he is actually I think he is a senior consultant or whatever that position is in BCG once you're in the fourth year of your, I guess, firm's role. And then the other person, she's the president scholar at Google. So she has been in Google for a very long time. She's been working at a bunch of CVCs. She's been working at a bunch of CVCs in the past. And then also, everybody with me had different focuses. Like there was one person extremely passionate about consumer. I was really passionate about basically everything because I was, again, very new to the space. But learned a lot from them because their corporate experience, when we were practicing pitches, when we were evaluating mock companies and doing a lot of those, I guess, reps for all of us, it just taught me a lot about how analytically rigorous they are when they evaluate companies. This was a skill I lacked early on when I didn't know how VCs actually sort of divest a company and figure out if it's worth an investment. So this was purely a boot camp. It ran for, I think, 8 to 10 weeks. The mentors that we had were from very successful venture firms. I learned a lot about the different asset classes within the asset class of venture capital. So that was new for me back then. But yeah, that's how I sort of worked in the role.
Yeah, and also for our audience, there's lots of boot camps or just like fellowships that are not like, internships with actual VC companies, but they're a really, really good start if you just kind of want to know if venture capital is for you, right? You got to kind of learn a little bit of the foundations first, and Breaking the VC also has one. But besides that, next one, Techstars,
Shout out to Break into VC.
shout out, Techstars Venture Deals Fellow.
Yeah, so this is something I'd actually recommend everybody that's tuning in into the podcast to take a stab at. Stars offers this venture deals course, which is actually taught by Brett Feld, who's the founder of Techstars. A bunch of other investors, including Elliot Robinson from Bessemer Venture Partners, and some of the other very prominent VCs are all a tutor in that course. I think it runs twice a year, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is one of the courses where the sort of screening process is relatively easy. So if you're somebody that's extremely passionate about the venture space, but have not had a lot of experience, should actually pursue this. Most interesting part of this course is it's kind of like a really, really accelerated boot camp, right? It teaches you a lot about how different firms have different theses. This was something I was extremely fascinated about. I was like, well, if there are hundreds of venture firms that exist out there, how do each firms differentiate from one another? What's the value that a founder could get if, let's say, I take in my money from Techstars compared to if I taken my money from Y Combinator, right? Like those very, and again, these might seem to be extremely easy questions, but in reality, when you're raising money, they're not. They're the questions that you would probably spend a lot of time on, especially if you're a company that VCs are running behind. So I think that course taught me a lot about how different firms are structured. How do they raise money? What are their LP engagements like? How does strategic investor get into the play? And there are a lot of venture firms that just raise money from people that care about impact, right? Impact funds are a big thing. And that was the one concept that I kind of got out from the boot camp because it was very unique. I'd never heard about it before. So yeah, shout out to Techstars for doing this. I think it was a very phenomenal experience for me. And yeah, you can be a lifetime fellow there and it's great.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, especially for, I mean, this sounds like something that especially solo GPs or someone who's going to start like a micro VC firm should definitely take and learn from. Yeah, the next one, let's go for Entrepreneurs First Fellow.
Yeah, this is very unique, very close to my heart. So Entrepreneurs First started over a decade ago now. The way the firm started was by Matt and Alice back in London, both ex McKinsey fellows. They really wanted to start a firm that takes a bet on individuals that choose outlier paths. Right? So they realize a lot of extremely exceptional people and people that have spikes in one or two of their professional, I guess, fields, they end up joining a lot of the big corporates like McKinsey, Bain. They also join investment banking. They join a lot of big tech firms, but their actual potential is very founder like. If they were about to start a company, they would do really well. And that initial insight that both of them had now made Entrepreneurs First just a week ago a unicorn. Entrepreneurs First raised about $200 million last week. So now it just really shows how credible backing individuals early on, even before they have an idea, but just literally assessing how you as a person, taking everything aside, are going to be successful if you get into the weeds of startup building, right? Like, what is unique about you if you start a company in a domain that you care a lot about? That was their sole thesis. A lot of the companies that came out of Entrepreneurs First, including Neptune Robotics, was one of the most, I think, one of the most unique business models I've ever seen, cleaning hulls of submarine using robots. They were funded by Sequoia. The other company that came out of them was Clio, which is a pretty big startup. I'm sure a lot of listeners have probably heard about. They also came out of Entrepreneurs First. The recent startup was Radical Health, which is, again, in pre-seed, they raised $5 million from Costa. So a lot of the metrics that they've seen over the years have evolved from people coming across different industries, right? D1 athletes, rock stars, individuals that are deep into hackathons, and a bunch of these archetypes that no one outside of the traditional venture firm really cared about. And that's why I was like, if I get an opportunity to work at Entrepreneurs First, I can build in my reps of how to become one of the best people to assess founder potential. And it's going to make me do a lot of good things and impactful things in venture capital. So it was a cold email that I did to one of the people that was running the fellowship. It's their inaugural fellowship, so they hadn't done it before. They're now trying to bridge a lot of their gap across the world because it operates in London, Bangalore, which is in India, and then in the US. So they're trying to bridge a lot of that talent back to San Francisco because they know a lot of high potential deals, a lot of most cracked individuals are surrounded in the same community. So it's called The Bridge. That's the program that they're kind of running a lot more. And now I was like, if I can get an opportunity to work with these individuals, learn from them early on, I think it would make me a very, very successful venture capitalist. Because at the end of the day, VC is a people's game, right? So yeah, that's how I got that opportunity. Entrepreneurs First doesn't invest in a company. Typically, everybody that gets into Entrepreneurs First and gets their 250K for 8% kind of award is basically put into a residency program. They spend 6 to 9 months, sort of honing down on their ideas, sort of crafting their business model, making their product maybe a beta or whatever. And then eventually, once they're done with all of that, they also do a lot of co-founder matching. So it's a full 0 to 1 kind of experience for any individual that has thought about starting a company, but either hasn't or has not been successful in the past, right? So it's not a stage typically. It's, if you think about pre-seed to seed, this is more of like pre-seed, right? It's kind of like a -1 to 0 stage where Entrepreneurs First really comes in and has a lot of impact that they've been able to deliver for over a decade now. So very different model. And for the first month, I was literally just finding exceptional people. I was scouting across campuses. I was scouting across rocketry clubs, Formula SAE clubs, to like literally athletes that were a part of my school, to media personalities that could eventually really build big brands in the future, and just bringing all of them together in the same roof and sort of helping them think about what their long-term career is going to look like. So that was the first month. And then since then, there were a lot of interesting things that I got to learn about the program. There were a lot of individuals that I met, which literally made me rethink about what I'm trying to pursue. And it was great, right? I mean, meeting the top 1% of individuals in any field can actually change the trajectory of your life. And that's what Entrepreneurs First taught me. Shout out to Alice, Matt, and everybody. But yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were trying to source amazing deal flow and amazing people from your campus and your local area. So let's talk about your roles at or near your university. So what was I'm a little confused, but just explain it a little more to me, right? Venture Capital Association, VC analyst to VC associate. What? and then student-led club? Like, what's the difference?
This is my favorite topic. Venture Capital Association is a club I started about a year and a half ago. This is the only student club on campus at UIUC which supports individuals that want to break into venture capital as a potential career path after they graduate. We take in everybody from freshmen to juniors into our club. We have two different boot camps. One of the kind of boot camp is called the Analyst Boot Camp, which is more of like a lecture based simulation where we have 8 weeks of content all across negotiation to deal terms, term sheets, sourcing, diligence. We teach all of that from scratch. We give you a lot of resources, including PitchBook, Crunchbase, a lot of these other essential tools that are actually used in the industry. Once that's done, we put you through a competition. This is the most fun part. So it's called the Shark Tank competition of UIUC. And again, it's a proprietary thing. We've been partnering with Granger, our School of Engineering, and Geese, our School of Business, to host this event. And this is a very unique one, right? It's not the typical Shark Tank that a lot of the audiences have heard about. We kind of flip the script here. So instead of startups coming to pitch, we all on the exec board act as venture investors and we bring in external judges who are very seasoned veterans in the venture space to evaluate all of our analysts who are going to be pitching a real startup to us. So these guys are going to be spending 2 weeks assessing real companies, preferably pre-seed or seed stage, and also preferably from UIUC, bonus points for that. If you're able to source some of those companies and pitch to us, we're going to do a rebuttal. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions about whether the company's the right fit or not. And there's a full role play scenario that we prepare you for in the past 2 weeks. And through all of that, these analysts get their reps in to assess how difficult it is to convince your IC when you break into VC. Because again, at the end of the day, you're still going to be either an analyst or an associate. A lot of your work is going to be convincing your partners whether or not to invest in a specific deal, given the research that you were able to accumulate from very less sources online, because these companies don't have a lot of data, right? Then it really comes down to how strong your intuition is, how strong you're expert about a very specific niche, and how well can you articulate it to actual investors that have been doing this for 20 plus years. So that's one of our boot camps. If you're in the top 20% of the analyst boot camp, you get into the associate boot camp. So the associate boot camp is where we pair you up with a real venture firm. So this is sort of like an externship. And an externship is just basically you're not officially an intern at the firm, but the people at the firm are supporting you to do a very specific task that's going to help move their needle forward. So we bring in a lot of those partners. We were able to bring in our venture capital arm, which I think has $25 million in AUM now, to support a lot of these entrepreneurs. We brought in a new private equity firm that was also started by two of our alumni to give them these externship opportunities. And in the future, we're going to bring a lot of the coastal funds and mega funds to support our boot camp and just make sure our sort of students get the best of the best experience that no other university can offer. So, yeah.
And you as a president, so you basically went through basically both boot camps, right? So you
Yes.
are
So
the
there
analyst.
was an interesting story. VCA as an association existed before I started it. There was a
Mhm.
big conflict in regards to a lot of the legal issues that they got into. There was some fraudulent stuff that was done by the previous leadership team. And then eventually we had to disassemble the entire org, rebrand it, and start it from scratch. And so that's why I do call myself as the founding president. Although the original Venture Capital Association was started about 8 years ago, but most of their focus was not on venture capital. Their focus was heavily on private equity. They were relying a lot on financial models as a way to get into VC, which, in my opinion, is not the only thing that you need to know about it, especially if you're targeting early stage venture firms. So, very different model, same name, but a bit of a different nuance, a different company altogether now. So, we can probably say that we kind of like help pioneer that venture wave on our campus. But yeah.
Yeah. And if we could talk more about it, if you would like to share, I'm curious because it sounded like the previous organization wasn't really doing like exactly what the name is, venture capital. So why did you not just like start a whole new organization instead of just like kind of changing the entire structure from the inside? Because that's much harder, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think about it in a bit of a different way. When the org was kind of in ruins and we knew this is not going to work, me and the other individuals that were sort of VPs back then, we realized the name is great. Venture Capital Association, as a brand name is phenomenal. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but everything that we do within the boot camp can obviously we obviously had to alter that. So we reached out to our College of Business. They were very supportive from the very beginning. They got to know about a lot of these, issues within the club before us, and they were like, "Well, we give you all power of autonomy to take it forward. Now the club is yours. It's student owned. It's not under Geese, so you can basically reinvent and create it to serve the actual venture capital community that again involves a lot of startups, but at the same time is extremely focused on some of these other things that don't only mean financial modeling, right? So I think that was, I mean, from a branding and sort of distribution perspective, the name really helped us because it was a very good name. I mean, kudos to the people that actually founded it. The founder was phenomenal. He's a great guy. He actually ran the club the way we are now envisioning it too. But every time, and this is very common in student clubs, right? When you have a change of leadership, when you have a sort of change of power and ownership there, a lot of things can actually go south if the leadership is not aligned on the shared vision of what the club started with. So, I mean, there are those things and very, I mean, nuances which are, again, messy, but at the same time, the right person can actually help pivot it. And I don't take all the credit to myself. Everybody that was with me on the founding team was extremely, extremely focused on just making it the most valuable resource on campus for individuals that want to break into VC. Yeah, that's how we thought about the entire restructuring and rebranding of the org.
And you mentioned you and the VPs at that time of the organization. Were you guys like, to put it bluntly, like, did you guys have like most of the control of what the club can and will do? As in, like, you guys didn't really have to go through like the utter bureaucracy of like these other VPs, like they kind of disagree with us. They kind of just want to keep things the way it is. Or did you guys just have full control and it was just an easier switch because
The one thing I was kind of lucky about was the VP of finance and the president typically are the ones that have the highest say on what the club needs to do or what the club has to do in the future. So me and the other guy that was the VP of finance, we both have the exact same vision. We knew where the club is supposed to go, what's going wrong, and there were some bridges that we had to burn. So there were people that I had to fire, but it was all to just make sure the community that we're building is actually servicing the right individuals and we're giving the right offerings and not putting anybody under the hood, right? Like the goal was always being student centric and supporting individuals the way we would like to have been supported when we joined in VCA and what we didn't expect to happen, right? So it was a very, I would say it was not a conflicting ground for me, but it was very difficult for me to sort of create that vision from scratch, given what had happened in the past. So the context really, really sort of like made me a bit emotional about how I will be able to take it forward. But then the right people, as I said before, right, all of my opportunities I've been able to succeed in some of them because of the right people and the people that I surrounded myself with. And so this was I mean, it was the same situation in VCA, right? There were some people that were not aligned to the vision, so they naturally had to be, excluded from the club. But there were other individuals that were not aware of what the club had to do, but they were extremely optimistic about how this could go forward. So I think that to a leader is very motivating because it just forces you on making the right decisions when you know there are a bunch of other people that would be there for you when shit goes wrong. Right. So I think that's how I think the club was able to succeed, and we're doing pretty well. Very, very, very grateful for all of those chances we took early on.
yeah, and it's really, really inspiring, especially for like, all of these students in different clubs in their own university, right? Where they're kind of like dealing with, hey, there's so much bureaucracy. Should we do this better? Should we do that better? But then you actually stepped up with, a bunch of people and you were like, okay, we have this legendary founding team. We're willing to risk it. We're willing to put in the work to make sure what is actually necessary. And on top of that, right? Like you said, the founder, the earliest founder from like 8 years ago or something, literally, this is how he or she envisioned it. So you guys are just bringing them back onto the track, and that's just so, so inspiring. So I guess like in terms of that, right? Talk about all of the resources for an aspiring VC in campus. So maybe just talk about UIUC and their resources for aspiring VCs.
if somebody wants to get into venture capital, the only way to do that is not just directly jump into the venture capital association and assume you're going to be a stellar VC, right? One of the natural ways to do it is actually get some sort of an experience in a startup environment, right? When I say that, it just doesn't necessarily mean you start your own company. Talking to founders, right? Getting on founder calls is something I think every aspiring VC should start doing, no matter what stage of their journey they're in. So UIUC, for instance, right? I'm a part of the Technology Entrepreneurship Center. I'm the lead program manager there. We help run the biggest collegiate demo day in the Midwest. This semester, we had 900 students, 360 teams, and 700K in funding from some of the best venture capitalists out there, Menlo Ventures, Pear VC, Caruso, et cetera, right? And I would say a lot of people that want to get into VC discount that. And which is, I think, in my opinion, is completely wrong. You should actually try to interact with the founders themselves. Because at the end of the day, you're only as good as your next best investment. This is something that everybody at Sequoia talks a lot about. Got a lot of mentors and senior partners that have helped me nourish my own skill sets in VC. And they've always taught that to me. They're like, never be super prudent on, hey, a big win. Always be extremely skeptical on how you're going to get the next big win, because that is what defines you as a venture capitalist. So I mean, start off with doing that. Start off with even having a interim role at a startup of, hey, like I can help you get your first set of customers. Or if I'm extremely technical, I can help you build your MVP out. Or I can just literally make more connections for you. If there's anything that I can maybe advise you on, happy to do that, right? Like get in those roles that are extremely low stake, but also very high input and very high impact, right? So start off with that. That's the number one university resource that we offer at UIC. The next thing is then eventually getting into VCA, right? So I think if you're curious about whether you're cut out to be a venture capitalist, the only way to find that out is to actually do the work that a VC does and see whether it's something you either like or it's something you're naturally good at. Now, there are individuals on both the sides, right? There are people that are really good at something, but they kind of hate it. And there are people that are not good at something, but they really, really want to do it, right? Like there are those doers, and then there are those exceptional individuals that just are very smooth in their execution, right? So I would say if somebody gets into VC, we only assess them based on their passion. We are very, I guess, potential first and metric second kind of team. We don't look at their past accolades. We don't care about what internships they've had. And it's very contrary to how a lot of other venture capital firms and associations and other universities recruit individuals. We have a really low kind of screening bar when it comes to, again, the vanity metrics, because I think I was assessed incorrectly in my early times. And I don't want the same situation to happen to somebody that's extremely passionate and doesn't get opportunity because of maybe a brand name that's missing on their resume, right? So I think that's the one thing we really try to encourage. But at the same time, we also care a lot about initiatives, right? If you've not been a part of bigger firms or don't have big brand names on your resume, what have you done in the past? Have you been somebody that's extremely proactive, or are you just reactive? Like, do you just literally act when the situation is extremely dire, and if you don't act, you're going to fail, right? Like, are you somebody that just steps up, rolls up your sleeve, and are like, okay, well, this is something I'm very passionate about. How do I get to the very end of it? What do I need for that? And I just start hitting ASAP, right? Like, those are the individuals that we want to have on our team. Because eventually, once we all step out, which is going to be very soon in the next 2 months, once I graduate, these guys are going to be the ones that take the flame, take the torch, and light it up way brighter than what we were able to. So yeah, that's how I envision a lot of the recruiting and the entire funnel that we built at UIC. Now, after you're done with VCA, if you're extremely interested in getting into venture capital, but not in like startup building, there's another organization that we're working with on the associate bootcamp. It's called Illinois Ventures. Shout out to some of the leaders there, Nancy, Jacob, and Paul. They're all extremely, extremely kind and very receptive to individuals that want to get their reps into early stage investing. So our university offers a lot of fellowships. They offer a lot of internships for individuals that maybe want to work there over the summer to just, get their reps into maybe financial modeling, doing primary, secondary research, to also essentially going over the actual back end work on how the venture firm works on a day-to-day basis, help partners with their, brainstorming, ideation, managing events, doing a lot of these platform and adjacent kind of roles that are also extremely essential for a venture firm that's growing at scale. So we have plethora of resources. I don't think resources is a problem at UIUC. It's all about the leaders to assess who would be the right person that actually utilizes these and kind of like helps steward the next wave of individuals.
It's about, yes, there is access to resources, right? But then I think what you also believe is that passion for something can actually really triumph over experience in a way. And that is so, so true because, one of the guests is that I've interviewed, which has a similar, student type of program, Peter Harris. What he said was that there was this one kid who just wasn't the most smartest in class, right?
Mhm.
Then he was like, okay, I want to apply again. I want to just like keep seeing Peter Harris in his office. I would just keep showing up to the building. And then at some point, Peter was like, okay, we got to give him a chance now because he's like so
Love it.
passionate and he just wants to do it, right? So then what happened was now he's all graduated. He's like on his way, and he is a general partner at a VC firm. So
Wow.
just goes to show, like, yes, you don't have to be really, really academically smart or have like tons of VC experience or startup experience or whatever, but you need to be smart about something. And
100%.
that is about being diligent on trying again and again and again. That is a type of smart as well. So, your way of screening people, that really, really just like resonates with me. Yeah. So, in terms of, that's the university, right? I'm curious because let's say someone who has been in the university ecosystem, their startup ecosystem, they're like, I have been talking to all of these student founders, maybe even some alumni founders, and I've been like trying to make introductions between like all of these people. I'm curious, like in terms of, for example, Illinois ventures or venture firms that closely partners with your university. Do they invest in student founders or do they only invest in alum?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think it's just a very natural transition into what I was going to talk about.
Yes.
Yes and no. I think a lot of the venture firms that, I mean, including some of our alumni like Pete Kuman, who's a general partner at YC, he visits our campus quite often. But a lot of these venture capitalists, I mean, there's a minority, I would say, like a very rare group of people that get, venture backed by some of these, top of the tier kind of VC firms while they're still students. But I would say a majority of these startups actually get like big time venture backed once they graduate from the university. I think a part of that is not just because they're not meant to have venture funding early on, but it's also because a lot of these individuals don't really want to drop out of college. They really want to continue their education. To them, pursuing what they care about means a lot. I mean, University of Illinois is still a public university, right? A lot of the people that are here are on student loans. A lot of the people here care a lot more about sort of impact rather than just having a brand name on your resume. That's always been something which is deep in our ethos. And I think venture firms respect that, right? I mean, there are other firms and, smaller tier accelerators that give them grants and funding and allocation support to help them scale. I mean, just kind of acting like a bridge until they actually raise money. But at the same time, there are also individuals that are really in only to just get venture backed and jump straight out into the startup world. So, and I would say the network that I surround myself with, almost everybody either wants to drop out or they want to get venture backed, right? They do want to get venture backed, but they also want to be a full time student. So I would say it also depends on the individual's risk appetite. Like if you're somebody that, is really bullish on your product and this is your life's work, you are going to do whatever it takes, right? No obstacle is big enough for you to stop. But then there are individuals that are debating whether or not this is something they would be going full time on, especially when they have offers from Meta, Google, Palantir, all of those bigger firms, right? So it's always a juggle between what's top of the mind for me, what's going to give me the most value in the short term, but then at the same time, how do I project myself as a leader if I get into the startup world and build what I've been very passionate about. So it's not, there's no definite answer there. It's always a internal debate that individuals have. And I would say most people trust their gut and they're almost always right. Yeah. And I think the most interesting part about this question, right, is so I'm one of the sort of individuals is also supporting the build of UIC's first student-led venture fund. It's called Orange and Blue Ventures. So we're estimating a raise of over $1 million in the next couple of months. We've already raised half a million from a family. It's called Ackerman's Family. It's all over our geese and sort of local media. Now, the goal is to create a fund where we would be selecting emerging managers. These are going to be juniors and seniors from a class that they take mandatorily. And then once they succeed, the top 10% of them are going to be the first set of fund managers that are going to be GPs at the Orange and Blue Ventures Fund and are going to be deploying actual money in Illinois based startups. Now, these startups can be startups that are existing on campus at that time, or they can also be founded from an alumni, right? We're going to be probably putting in checks from 25 to 50K, and it would be more of a perpetual fund. So all the money that gets returned is going to be invested back into the fund. And it's a very sort of cyclical approach. We've got one of the mentors that I have who's helping me and everybody else sort of establish this fund. He has been in William Blair for over 20 years. William Blair is one of the biggest investment middle market banks, and he's extremely passionate about promoting the field of venture capital. Now, the only thing we were not able to offer as VCA was actual check writing skills and making our individual students put in money. And this is the exact bottleneck that Orange and Blue Ventures is able to solve going forward. Now, I'm extremely envious because I won't be a part of it. I'm going to be graduating in the next 2 months. But at the same time, very, very, very delighted to see that this is an initiative that UIUC took seriously. And it's going to really shape the next wave of VCs coming out of our campus. And hopefully we see another Mark Andreessen in the next 10 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you guys also have like from what I've remembered, a VC arm of the university.
Yes. So
Like
that
talk
is
about the
the
different.
Illinois Ventures. That is what I referred to early on.
Okay.
So Illinois Ventures is our venture capital arm. That's a different fund, got different LPs, some of our endowments and all of those money coming in. They invest in startups, right? They're not directly tied into the university. They operate as a sole identity. But Orange and Blue Ventures is going to be student led. It's going to be under the College of Business, and VCA also is under the College of Business. So it's going to be like a feeder into Orange and Blue Ventures. Some of our best students are going to become emerging managers at the new student-led fund, which is going to give them a lot of, I guess, first-hand experience into being a general partner, right? So I think this is phenomenal. I wish this existed when I was a freshman or sophomore. But yeah.
And that sounds incredible, right? Like imagine if you're just like a junior or senior and you get to experience all of this. You're like, oh my gosh, like this would be the dream college if you want to break into VC. So in terms of that, right? So I'm curious in the assumption that the founders are, obviously the best in the world, because that's what we're talking about earlier, is that okay, these founders are amazing, right? They
Mhm.
can technically get those VC funds to really just invest in them, but then they choose not to because, for example, it could be for reasons of stability, like you said,
Sure.
hey, why don't I just go for Meta and get that safe paycheck? Or it could be reasons of, hey, I don't really want to drop out right now. Like, I don't see that
Yeah.
as often, even though I am a great founder, a great entrepreneur. But then what about the other side, right? What do you, and talk more about the rare instances of the student entrepreneurs who were funded by the VCs. Like talk about that rare instance of like, is the student startups in campus, like, are they actually good enough that VCs actually want them? Talk about that side.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, there's a very recent example, right? I mean, there's this one startup. So when Pear VC came to campus for the first time this month, I was able to host a general partner who leads their dorm recruiting, which is sort of like their kind of like university based scouting programs. He came to campus, he did a lot of one on ones with a lot of individuals and, people that he thinks are going to be a great fit for Pear X, which is one of the most selective accelerators in the country. So we did do a bunch of one-on-ones with I think almost 15 to 16 startups that night. And one of the startups, although they're very early, right? These are guys that have not built a full-fledged MVP out yet. We saw a spark in them. Like both of us could tell that, hey, the work that they're doing, they found a problem in such a stack of robotics that a lot of these bigger corporations are not going to attack early on. I mean, it might eventually get into a bigger acquisition, but the way that they've thought about go to market is extremely unique. And at the end of the day, right, building a product is getting more commoditized, but the way you get your customers, the way you build your sort of sales funnel, the way you get your revenue and the entire distribution mapped out is getting very, very big on terms of like the X factor that you can develop as a founder, right? That, and then obviously the regulatory hurdles that you're able to solve with your IP and whatnot, right? So these guys, both of them, I believe sophomores or juniors in college, really cracked. They knew what they were doing. They didn't have answers to all questions, but instead of apology, they had a conviction, right? This is one of the biggest things that I've learned from best of the best founders. They don't apologize, but they say, hey, I don't know the answer to this question right now, but I will get back to you in the next 24 hours with the best answer you've ever heard, right? That's the power of their passion, right? It just shows off not as ego, but just as pure drive. And so these guys were the ones. Now, so we try to get them in Pair X, but before we knew it, A16Z Speedrun got them in. So now they're in A16Z Speedrun, and they're also, I think, pretty sure they were a part of Kozad too at some point. So it just means that a lot of these people that are extremely early on, if they know how to crack a very specific niche into a market that's either dominated or not by bigger incumbents, they can get venture back in the in a matter of days, if not weeks, right? Like it just makes things extremely fast. And given how big the venture landscape is going towards like a barbell analogy, I'm sure you've heard about this from a bunch of other VCs too. It just makes me as a early stage venture capitalist feel that if you've got the right conviction, if you've got the right team, every VC is going to jump at you early on because this is how they're going to build their wedge beyond the actual Series Ds and Es at companies at the scale of Waymo and whatnot, right? So I think that's how a lot of the early stage investing is getting shaped. And I 100% agree. Like a lot of the people that are part of our accelerator and the pipeline that we've been building at UIC are most likely going to be venture backed, and they'd be more than capable to raise multi-million rounds, even while they're still in pre-seed and pre-product, right? So I think that just shows a lot about the potential of how Midwestern founders are extremely technical. The only thing that's still kind of like a missing link is the access to the right individuals, which again is not as big of a problem if everybody tries to get their heads down and focuses on hitting it right. So yeah.
Yeah, and VCs like A16Z literally raised like 10 billion. So they need some place to spend that money, right?
Yeah,
And
dude. I mean, it's insane because I mean, A16Z, Thrive, Lightspeed, Sequoia, they all raised, I mean, upwards of $9 billion. And and from a VC perspective, I don't know how they're going to return it. I mean, like the outcomes that they need to generate have to be never seen before, right? And if all firms are able to generate those outcomes and these are bigger players, I think venture is going to be evolving into a very different asset class than what we all know it of. So yeah.
yeah, and it sounds like, it could either go of one direction where it's like, hey, let's kind of just like YOLO and let's if AGI happens, or it could be the other direction of if you think about it, right? Like, for example, a 30 billion PE firm is pretty common. So if you
Yeah.
think about like a VC becoming PE, which is VC is a category of PE, right? But
Yeah.
it becomes like PE, then yeah, I mean, it's pretty normal, but like, are they actually gonna YOLO it, or are they actually like making those kind of safer PE bets of like
Right.
3x or some type of return, right? And you just don't know, and we're gonna have to wait to find out. But yeah, back to the startups. You said that these student startups, they are very venture backable. So based on what statistics, like, are we looking at, hey, they've generated 10K monthly recurring revenue, or what are the statistics that you guys actually look at to say like, okay, they're venture backable?
No, I would say revenue, not at all. Like most of these startups don't have any either one of those three financial statements to actually evaluate, right? A lot of these founders, I feel, when we were evaluating them, their meta skill, like the best of the best thing that they could possess, was the self belief in their idea, right? Execution and vision. I mean, everybody talks about it. Everybody says, hey, like if you're not able to spin out a product in the next couple of weeks, I mean, what are you even doing? Claude exists and yada yada yada. I feel the biggest thing that you can have as an individual right now with how uncertain everything around you is your self-belief. I mean, if you know that You've talked to dozens of customers. You've gone on these discovery calls to assess where the problem is. You've talked to everybody in your entire supply chain to map out how you would be able to position yourself without being eaten out by a bigger player. And third, you just know that you've been able to do things consistently. You've got the right team. All three of those factors, dude, they can make your startup extremely successful, right? I think beyond, I mean, there obviously are a few metrics, right? Like when you're thinking about these startups and especially in extremely competitive accelerators, they do have metrics. They do care a lot about, hey, like, how many pilots do you have? What is your conversion ratio like? If you've projected your LTV to CAC, is it higher than 4:1? Like, all those metrics are important. Your net retention is very important in SaaS because at the end of the day, if you're doing these bigger chunk of clients that are having super high enterprise values, are you able to actually generate any profit over the course of your customer acquisition journey, right? All of those metrics are super important. But what really matters is, even if your idea sucks, like even if you pivot once you get into the accelerator, do you have what it takes to still scale it to a multi-billion-dollar company, right? One such example of this I would love to shout out is Glide AI. Glide AI is building the operating system for banks, not just any bank, not a commercial bank, but for a consumer bank and a credit union. Now, their product, although is extremely in a red ocean where a lot of these bigger players like Mantle, Plod, Stripe, Brex, all of these fintech companies to some extent are taking their share from each other. Glide is getting into a very different customer attacking segment, right? Like they're targeting these credit unions that are ran that I mean that kind of run on these member owned partnerships, right? It makes the entire profit sharing different. Everything from loan underwriting to getting your customers onboarded to just solving regulatory hurdles, getting a proprietary data, just different, right? I mean, you're not competing with the same people. This is how you at least scale. Now, I don't know what their outcome is going to be like, but I'm pretty sure that with their team and how they're rampantly growing through media and also their, fast sales cycles, they're going to go big in the future. And that's how Pear was able to back them. They're a part of Pear VC's portfolio company. I was able to do a fireside chat with both of the founders, and man, they were so impressive. Like the way that they broke down the business model and how they've been able to stand against these bigger, on the shoulders of giants. It told me a lot about how the venture landscape would evolve, especially for a lot of these other early stage companies. And there are hundreds of these examples from UIC, right, across different verticals. I'd be more than happy to name one, but I think it's going to stretch beyond the scope of this podcast. So I would say, like, it just shows me a lot of potential, and it's not just potential up in the air, but it's actual traction that I can then sort of pattern recognize and deliver as insight to my venture firms. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's freaking incredible. Could you give us like a quick snapshot of the one that got into the A16Z speedrun?
Yeah. So the good thing about both of them was they were both working in AMD. One of the guys was also like a founding go-to-market guy at Bordy. I think you've probably heard about Bordy. It's like a AI-driven matchmaking slash a startup that does a lot of venture capital raise and supports founders through purely automated strategies. It's like a pretty big thing now. Um, I'm also a Bordy venture partner, so that was the one thing that I kind of got my reference checks in from. It made me extremely confident on making a bet on those two. But again, we were a bit late. A misdeal is a misdeal. But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, and so we talked about the school. Let's go to the most recent. What is Pure VC? What stage does Pure VC invest in?
100%. You're right. So I'll take you back to the sort of founding story of Pear. I think this would be a fun, I guess, discussion for all the audience that is listening to this. So Pear was initially started by two individuals. One of them is named Pagemon, the other one's named Mar. Both of them, Pagemon, very, very core American dream journey. He was selling rugs, Persian rugs in San Francisco. He spent a lot of time, became the best rug seller salesman in his field. And a lot of these individual, high net worth individuals were venture capitalists that used to come to his store and buy rugs. So through that entire sort of experience, he got touch. He was able to personalize a lot of his offerings, and he was able to learn from some of these venture capitalists, including Doug Leone from Sequoia Capital, who he was then able to co-invest with for, I mean, with Sequoia Capital, they were able to co-invest with Dropbox as an angel investor, all the way from starting as a rock sales guy to then becoming a very successful venture capitalist, right? So very typical American dream journey, very big founder scars, and a great, great persuader. He knows how to get his work done. The other person, extremely execution heavy, very strong analytical, horsepower. His name is Mar. She, Pagemon convinced her to start a venture firm together to back individuals. I think more, I mean, now obviously more than a decade ago when they started Pear, the goal was to support individuals early on, not just write checks, but be operators with them and help them scale their company, be it through network effects or be it through getting their first customers and a lot of other offerings that now a lot of these pre-seed and seed stage firms have gotten into the motion of. So again, very iconic sort of Silicon Valley journey that both of them sort of kickstarted. Now Pear is obviously massive. They, I think, have over $800 million in AUM. Their last fund was about $432 million. Some of the iconic companies that they've backed include Dropbox, DoorDash, Wanta, Gusto, WizAI, Listen Labs, one which was also backed by Sequoia, and a lot of these other star players. And their thesis is very simple, right? They typically want to be the first check in, and they have a very vast range of investments. So they do everything from 250K upwards of roughly $6 million if they want to make a seed investment. They typically prefer to get into a company pre-seed. So the startup that I did mention early on, Glide, was actually a part of PearX, which is their accelerator. And so, yeah, again, it's very, very pure pre-seed, seed stage venture firm with a deep focus on a bunch of verticals, including consumer, enterprise, fintech, healthcare. They don't do a lot of medical devices, but outside of that, they're extremely focused on basically every big vertical that they know is going to produce a lot of enduring companies in the future. So yeah, that's a bit about Pear's kind of founding journey. Now, obviously, I work with one of their general partners, Khalil, as I mentioned before, who's the partner at Pear Dawn. And so my initial work was actually, again, sourcing individuals, but this time it was different. Sourcing for Pear was, I think, one of the toughest things that I've ever done because the bar was super high, right? Like it's not as if, oh, I meet a founder tonight and then I just send them in tomorrow to Khalil and ask him, hey, do you think this guy's going to be the right fit for PearX? No, PearX only takes in 20 to 25 people per cohort twice a year. And, this was something that I felt, hey, it's stepping into a big shoe, and every person that I bring into their funnel has to be extremely vetted. And the only way I can do that is through, you know, rigorous analysis, rigorous reference checks, meeting the founders, assessing their company, doing my own research, creating memos, and just drafting all of that to eventually build such a strong conviction that I can then defend against some of these partners that have been doing this for, again, 2 or 3 decades now, right? So I think that was the first part of my work. Then obviously I do support in a lot of diligence and diligence of some of these hyperscalers that are maybe coming out of YC, Techstars, and Antler and whatnot. But that's how I started the work. Now I'm also doing a lot of their sort of internal hiring for portfolio companies through a different program called Pair Prime. So if there are any engineers that are tuned into this podcast and if they want to get into Pair's portfolio companies as engineers, definitely search up what Pair Prime is. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity to join a breakout startup early on. But yeah.
And then how did you get in? Like, what was the main reasons you were able to get into this fellowship?
Yeah, so I think if I remember it correctly, I knew a person that was a Pear fellow before. So we were just having a discussion and he told me how phenomenal the experience was for him and what he learned from the partners that he worked with. I was like, oh, shoot, dude. I mean, I do want to get into venture capital. Seems like Pear knows their way around, and Pear also has had a lot of successful bets in the past. They know what it takes to scale a company beyond just writing a check. And so I think applications were open, but surprisingly, what happened was Khalil somehow got to know about the work that I do on campus because of the content that I was producing on LinkedIn and everything that I had online, be it through the media that was produced from UIUC or the founders that were a part of Pair that somehow were connected to me through Cozad, right? So it was a very strong networking effect that literally rolled into picture when I actually interviewed with him. It was a very quick interview. Again, he's very, very kind, extremely humble, extremely tactical in his approach. No BS. pure specific answers to questions. And that's the kind of person I would love to learn from, right? Like it's super aspirational for me to be surrounded by individuals that I want to be, getting into the shoes of eventually when I become a relatively more experienced investor. And so that's how I got into Pear, and it's been the best. It's been the highlight of my journey in college so far.
Could you give us for the audience, right, who literally just heard this and you said, okay, they set such a high bar. I've got to get references from all of these like people. And then I've also get this due diligence type of sequence, this type
Mhm.
of process. How would someone in the audience get access to what they should actually do in this due diligence process?
No, I think this is a great question. So I would say a couple of things. One, definitely exploit all the online resources, including some of these bigger industry reports like Gartner, Statista, IBIS, and whatnot. I think they paint a very clear white paper picture of how an industry is specifically evolving. I think it's a great starting point, right? And I'm talking about this from a top-down approach. If you're really low on time, this is the best approach to focus on. But if you have a significant chunk of time allocated to making the best diligence case possible, you should follow more of like a bottoms up approach where you start off with the customer, get their pain points, and then you sort of evaluate the market. But again, going back to the ideology, right? So you start off with these bigger reports. It gives you a strong sense of what exists in the market, who are some incumbents, what was the history of evolution in that specific space or function of the industry. Once you're done with that, the next best step is to then plug in some of the most, I guess, reputed resources online, including TechCrunch, going back to Reddit forums, right? And Reddit forums are a big thing. I've heard a lot of VCs now actually relying heavily on some of these, like short form rampant content platforms like, Twitter groups or Reddit forums, because it gives you a very strong sense of opinions. I mean, obviously, not all of those opinions are things you need to care about when you're doing diligence, but especially if you follow somebody whose thoughts or decision making frameworks resonate with you, it doesn't hurt evaluating things from their lens. And so then I would say utilize GPT, Claude, whatever platform you think is the best for your use case. Try to be a great prompter, right? I mean, prompt engineering, we've all heard it's necessary. Everybody is trying to like sort of practice it as much as possible. I would say be a meta prompter. Search what a meta prompter is. Try to get deep into the field of, hey, how can I crystallize all of this massive chunk of information into something that's one, extremely correlated to the firm that I'm working with. Because if you're working with one of these venture firms, you do have a clear sense of what their thesis looks like, right? And if you don't have a clear sense of that, please ask your partners and your mentors that are supporting you to do this diligence, right? Because if you don't have that, you're basically missing out on the actual context of your evaluation. And so once you're done with all of that, plug everything into a specific LLM. You train it based on your voice, your approach into what you think about investing, what are the metrics that you care a lot about. Once all of that is done, you're going to get a pretty clear understanding of what the startup is doing, what's unique about them, what are some of the biggest risks that they face. And then the last part, which is also the most important part of your reference check, is talking to either the investors at these startups, which is actually very difficult to get into. But if you are able to, phenomenal, nothing better than that. Or talk to the customers, if not direct customers, potential customers at these startups, right? Like your job as a VC, if you invest in that startup, would eventually be to actually help the startups get those customers. So might as well do your job before and see if there's actual pull from the market, or is it all just a hype that the startup is trying to create? That is obviously one of your biggest leading indicators. And so yeah, I think that's a pretty solid framework. And I'm almost certain a lot of the partners also do that beyond obviously, cold calling somebody that's super senior, which a lot of us as students don't really have the ability to do it. But I think these 3 or 4 steps that I laid out would be extremely critical for anybody that wants to get their reps into due diligence into early stage companies.
Awesome. So, what the interview process is like for Pure VC, for all the other VC roles that you've been in, also like maybe one or two questions that they would normally ask you.
100%. Yeah, I'll like to lay it out more generic. So like everybody that's maybe recruiting for a VC beyond, whatever the VCs that I work with is also deriving a lot of value from this. So typically a venture firm depends again. This is a very, very, very generic answer. Don't rely upon this for all your venture interviews, but I would say it typically starts off with your background, your motivations, and why you got into VC or why venture capital is a potential path that you'd like to pursue. Now, the obvious red flag in those questions is don't say, hey, I want to make a ton of money. That's why I want to get into VC, right? Like, I mean, yes, venture capital gives you big returns, but that's not the only goal that you should have as a venture capitalist, right? Your goal has to always be around supporting founder and helping them go big and be a part of their journey, right? Like their massive is going to be big for you when it comes to the return that you're able to generate. But you're doing a fiduciary business. You're not playing the game only for the sake of taking an exit and not giving a F about anything else. So I think that's the first thing you should think about. Hey, why are you actually interested in venture capital? The second thing is what in venture capital really excites you, right? I mean, and this really explains to the interviewer how deeply have you studied the field of venture capital. Now, you don't have to have exact answers for that, right? Like, if you're somebody who says, hey, I love doing research, I love studying private markets, and I love especially studying private markets that entail, financial technology, or financial services, or healthcare, or genomics, right? Like, if you can boil it down to the most fundamental layer of that stack, that's enough. You don't have to have a very superficial answer to support or just suit to the whims of that other person that you're interviewing with, but it has to relate to one of the core functionalities of what a venture capitalist does. So those are the two big questions. I would say they typically take you in the first one or two interviews. Obviously, you need to know a lot about your own journey and why you did the things you did. And then on the technical side, when it comes to a case interview, what typically happens, and again, this is different for venture firms depending on their stage or their sort of thesis and whatnot. They're going to give you a case either early on, so before 1 or 2 days before the interview, or they're going to give you a case during the interview, which is probably going to be like the 45 minutes to one hour long interview process, where they would give you some time to evaluate the company, think about the metrics that mean a lot to you, come up with your own individual thesis, and then pitch that thesis to the person that's interviewing you. Now, once you're done with that, they're obviously going to backfire with some of the questions that might come off as a pleasant surprise to you, or you might already have answers to. The goal there is to not make you get to the right answer, but to see how you think, right? Every individual has biases. Every individual has a perception about an industry, based on their exposure or based on their experiences in the past. So I'd say don't try to be objective there. Be as subjective as you can. Now, this could come off as a very contradictory piece of advice, but I would say most investors are extremely opinionated, right? Like nobody is like a blank piece of paper. Nobody is just a spray and pray, especially on the bigger level. So the more, if you really want to impress the venture capitalist with your skills, be authentic, right? And that's the only way to show your authenticity. Now, once you're done with those two rounds, behavioral and technical, the interview process could evolve into a bunch of different things, right? You might just be able to go to meet them in person. They might fly you out to their HQ and ask you cultural fit questions and maybe ask you questions about what would you do once you get into our firm? What does the first 60 to 90-day roadmap look like? And those are all the questions that are extremely dependent on the firm and the role that you're getting into. But this is my sort of one-on-one on venture recruiting.
Yeah. And, obviously, like you says, there could be different ones based on the size of the company, the size of the VC firm, but that is basically the general type of thing for that. So I know you talked a little bit about how to break into venture capital. For our viewers who needs an actionable plan, implement right away, what would be your recommended 6-month plan to fully break into VC for maybe international students? And then say month 3, 4, 5.
Sure. No, I think this is a great question. I mean, I would say it doesn't really differ if you're an international student or if you're not. I would say the process is still very similar. The first thing, again, when you're reaching out to a venture firm, I mean, again, there are multiple ways to get into a venture firm. Whatever I'm prescribing, don't take it on face value. You might have other skills, you might have other advantages that you can leverage to break into a specific firm. But I would say broadly, and from my opinion, which actually works most of the times, is if you're really interested in a very, very specific firm, study their past investment. I mean, success leaves patterns. Try to find those patterns. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to act smarter than the partners there. this is one of the biggest problems I've seen a lot of our analysts that also do. I mean, they try to outsmart individuals that have been playing this game for more than 20 years. No, you cannot. That's just like saying, hey, I'm going to beat the S&P 500 because I know Nvidia is going to go big in the future. Well, you might be true, but if you're wrong, you're going to be disaster. Like you're going to be complete disaster. I would say study them very closely, infer some of their context based on the time of their investment. So let's say if a company is invested in Pinterest, or if a venture firm is interested in Pinterest, they would probably not invest in Pinterest now. Why did they invest in Pinterest 20 years ago or 10 years ago, right? Like try to get a sense of the market and a sense of the product or the service that the company is offering. So you don't only read the memos, but you also care a lot more about the timing of when that investment was made. I really used to avoid this. I never thought this would be important. But the more I got into VC, the more I realized market cycles do matter a lot, right? Some of the companies that were backed back then would probably not be valuable now. And you can see that on the actual, their, entire roadmap when they scale. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you really want to work for one individual at a venture firm, I would say study the partner, study everything that the partner has written, or if he or she has appeared on podcasts, definitely tune into them. Certainly read their newsletters, blogs, whatever you can get a hand on, just consume, right? Consuming information is not bad, but if you only consume and if you don't produce anything, it's not going to take you anywhere, right? Like you're just going to be a jester in the field, and nobody's going to consider you to be somebody of value, right? They would not regard you as an individual that they would want to work with. So yes, I would say those are the two big things. Now, a 6-month, I guess, tactical plan is going to be, again, focus on these two fundamentals. Certainly read up everything that you care about for that firm, the way that they've evolved. I mean, there are firms that are too tough to handle, like, A16Z, they spin out with content, and their distribution engine is way faster than a human can comprehend. But in those cases, right, like try to get into a very specific niche within the firm. Try to just sort of replicate the investment pattern. Try to talk to individuals the way a partner would. Try to mimic that a bit early on. It's going to really, it's going to really come off clean once you get into these interviews and you actually talking to these partners, because they would know, hey, like this person is a student of the game, right? Like he's not just here to, fake it till he makes it, but he's also in here to just sort of establish that, hey, I do want to play this for the long game and I care a lot about people, right? Like, don't be insensitive to founders. Don't just, throw all your metrics out in the air. Like, get on a lot of founder calls, and getting on founder calls, in my opinion, is one of the easiest things you can do. It doesn't have to be a founder of the next Airbnb, right? You can literally get on calls with people in your college that you think are cracked, people that might be really, really smart. Just do that, right? Just start off with those things. And I think if you do that for 6 months consistently, you don't really need to send deal flow. Like, I think one of the worst advice that I've gotten is just keep on sending deal flow and the right partner is going to take you in. Well, it could be a great idea, but it also means you have way too much bandwidth for a bunch of venture firms. Now, if your focus is only on one firm, sure, it's a great strategy, right? Like if you know the right startups, send it their way. They're going to know your judgment and they're going to be able to make a decision on you much more quicker than somebody else that's cold emailing them and trying to get into the firm. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend.
What's the best place to reach you?
100%. It's a great question. Thank you so much for the entire pod, Joe. First of all, I think the best way to reach me is via LinkedIn. I'm extremely active there. I try to do a lot of my thought leadership, which is sometimes mocked at, but sometimes also extremely influential when you're talking about the right things. And if you have a very specific goal in your mind when you're pushing out content. So I think if somebody wants to connect with me, definitely reach out to me via LinkedIn. My DMs are always open. And if you're building something extremely cool, you can reach out to me via my school email, which is ayushpg2@illinois.edu. And so I'd be able to help you raise your next venture money.
Who are perhaps two amazing VCs that you would recommend as future guests to our podcast?
I'd like to dial down a bit and talk about individuals that I really, the people that are actual close mentors of mine. So one individual that would be a great fit for the pod would be, her name is Nancy Sullivan. She is the CEO and managing director at Illinois Ventures, very big in not just Illinois, but the entire Midwest Chicago venture landscape. Great human being, extremely kind, very good with students because that's her day to day job, but also extremely big on deep tech as a venture focus. So I think that would be a great, you know, I guess focus that you probably haven't explored as much. Well, I would say there's another guy that I recently met. I don't know if you're familiar with him. His name is Jake. Jake is from Antler, Austin. He's a principal there. We invited him on campus last year. Phenomenal speaker, has a great journey as a founder, and extremely. I think he's one of the best. I think he's one of the only VCs that has a very clear and perfect mix of technical and sales skill. I've not seen a lot of VCs at his level executing at that sort of precision, and I would say he'd be a great guest on your pod. Thank you very much.